oxygen and pills in the hospital, if they made it that far, but they still croaked in the end. As I say, no resistance. But knowing that didn't help when it came to storing them. I had 5 in the freezer at Mike's, 10 in my own freezers, and the oven was going round the clock dealing with the rest. I was doing it all in shifts with the chink bomber and slept on a steel camp bed in my office. It was comfortable enough. God knows why they call them camp beds. Any soldier wouldn't sleep on one by choice. We had much better sleeping arrangements wherever we went in Afghanistan or Iraq. We just chucked the locals out of their hovels and took their beds. The marauding invaders have done that since time immemorial. Why should we have been any different? Jimmy is really useful as far as it goes. He likes his sleep and won't do a night shift. I have to handle the calls in the oven some nights, and when I get back to the office with a fresh body, the ashes are red hot and there will often be a skull staring at me, the last to go on the body, and sometimes I have to mince that up and it's still got bits of the brain in it. I'm sorry if that upsets you, gentle reader, but that's just the way it is. There's nothing very nice about death until perhaps you're nicely 6 feet under. We don't go that deep out here as rule, or sealed up in the columbaria niche with Jimmy's little sack of nice things to accompany you on the way across the river. He never lets me look into sacks. It would be disrespectful, he said, and I agreed with him. As said, he's a good partner, but he does have some strange friends. Take the West Indians that turned up one afternoon. I nearly shat myself. They were a really ugly bunch, going on about how they liked Jimmy and how they'd met him in a bar, and they had this sick relative up country and they wanted to reserve a burial plot. I didn't believe a word. For one thing, Jimmy doesn't hang around in bars. The most I ever saw him drink was a wine cooler, I think, that time I met him, or was it some time after? He was just trying to be sociable, kind of pally with me, and I was trying to see if he was one of the pies sheds who hang around Death Street training their liver day in and day out. Perhaps he didn't even drink a cooler. I can't remember. But I could see he certainly wasn't all the type which frequents bars, and that was a plus point. You don't want a pies shed as a partner in anything. Turning up all hours and always sullen with a hangover headache. They drink on the job, and they can't wait to get back to it over lunch or come 5 o'clock. Jimmy drank his Californian Beaujolais, Pepsi or Coke, and no sugar in it. That was it. I remember now. Anyway, these Trinidad and Tobago guys gave me the creeps. It was like that scene of Monty Python where Luigi Visconti, played by Michael Palin, comes round and starts breaking things in the office with his bunch of tough mates. A protection shakedown. That's what it looked like. They didn't actually break anything, but they went on about how much money was going through my operation and how awful it would be if it was interfered with by hostile elements. And they just wanted to spare me a lot of trouble. Cooperate with me. Explore business opportunities. Like you want to set up a funeral business? I asked naively. They thought that was hilarious. If only they had laughed without that sinister overtone. Too much office work. And paperwork. We ain't what you would call a pen-pushing office types, said one of them, the leader. I thought as he did most of the taking. He was called Joseph. We prefer to be hands-on in business and in life. Very hands-on. That's us. And they all thought that was very funny too. Jimmy saved me by coming through the door just as a pregnant pause was becoming a full-blown awkward silence. "Oh, you got here," he said, nodding to the Trinidadians and shaking their hands like they were old friends. I gave him an incredulous glare. I wanted an explanation but saw that I would have to be prepared to wait for it. He kind of sized up the situation because he said, "They've been giving you a hard time, Dusty? They're a rough bunch, ain't you guys? Funny with it too though. Would you fellas like to step upstairs into my office a minute?" His office wasn't upstairs, so I guessed he meant the roof. A very good place considering, as I wanted to throw one or two of them off it right there and then. I had ordered a couple of freezers to go up there, but they hadn't arrived. It would have been a good gag, I suppose, to open one of the others in the back and show them the contents. I doubted if it would shock them. Anyway, 10 minutes later, after their little talk, down they all trotted, as meek as lambs. They made for their vehicles, a Lexus and a Raptor, big and showy in our little front car park. "Sorry about that," Jimmy said. "Dunno what got into me to start talking to those guys. Must have been feeling lonely or something. Or just curious. Never really talked to fuzzheads before. They're nice guys underneath it all." "Really? Well, they didn't show me any of it." "Yes, they are a bit rough at the edges. I'll give you that." "And what this Tom and Jerry story about a dying relative up in Siem Reap?" "Oh, there's some truth in that. But I doubt if they would use our services. Seems he's a bit of a pothead. Or cokehead. I forget which." "You do know some strange people." "Life's rich tapestry. Life's like that. Ever read that in the Reader's Digest? Full of oddball stories. I'll remember to get a subscription. Now look. Things are getting serious. I have 2 bodies to pick up right now and you've gotta help or I'm fucked." "Sure thing, boss. Where are they?" I drove the bus to the first. He was being held in one of the prissy little shyster quack clinics which cajole and rip off the city's more affluent invalids. It was run by a Singaporean outfit and looked like something out of science fiction now, with people in full white paper outfits and long blue rubber gloves standing outside like astronauts or aliens, handing out face masks sealed in little plastic packets but not free, as you had to give them $1 to get one. We brought our own, but they wouldn't do. We also had to douse our hands in thick alcohol gel and take a temperature check on a little machine which assured us that we were perfectly normal at present. "We've come to collect someone," I said, and I showed the Khmer side of my business card, which could have said, "Get stuffed." As far as I know, the wiggly squiggly language of Khmer, which looked like a spider had had some sort of fit after falling into a pool of ink. They had their own morgue and it was doing a brisk trade. Our man wasn't in the morgue proper, as they reasoned I would be picking him up pronto, he being a foreigner and worthy of some attention. He was in the queue. This was composed of 6 or 8 little body bags in one corner of the cold dark room, partly covered with a tarpaulin, and the myth of them was such that no amount of pak fa yow could stop me feeling like I wanted to retch there and then. Jimmy was calm as usual and had a pair of perspex goggles as extra protection against the dreaded COVID-allergy, as I called it. He's not really stiff yet. A Bruce, but not all that heavy. "Life is good to us sometimes," I said, and we hauled him onto a trolley and got him into the van. The second visit was a Steve, and they're the most poverty-stricken of all as a rule. Many are living on the basic British pension, which wouldn't afford you many luxuries even in the third world, but the life of a sad old expat was all luxury in a way. Poor people often can't afford essentials, but they always manage to afford a few luxuries. Fortunately, a man's little inessential extras were cheap out here: cigarettes, women and wine, I mean. Well, not wine but cans of beer. And it wasn't really women as such, but hard-as-nails bar girls who were getting pricier to screw all the time. They were also the most expensive things in the world long-term, as they took you completely to the cleaners if they could manage it, and most of them were experts in doing so and succeeded magnificently. This Steve had been picked clean, I could tell. He wasn't in Death Street but in one of the shakedown guest houses up near the real red light district, but there weren't all that many red lights. Just groups of painted whores visibly going to sleep on high stools, sizing up men's wallets outside dim smoky bars with names like Heart of Darkness, Black Pearl, Phnom Penh and Five Sisters. The guest houses were just love hotel knocking shops with a bed, a TV, sometimes a little fridge in the shower, mainly designed for the fuck-and-go crowd, but sometimes they are more pretentious and tried to be like little regular hotels. Our man was in one of the latter, and it had pairs of red velvet curtains at each window which didn't meet each other all the way and left a gap of sunlight if you tried to close them. We were just hauling Steve out of his little room when we stumbled on a huge man in a Stetson and polished boots which must have been snakeskin. "Marvin, what are you doing here?" said Jimmy. "Just passing through, you could say. Need a hand?" We did need a hand, and the big American man, who talked with a southern drawl, was exactly what we were looking for. There was suddenly not much room up front when the man squeezed his bulk between me and Jimmy. "Name's Marvin," he said and flashed a big white smile. "Nice to make your acquaintance." He was wearing a lot of leather apart from the boots, a leather jerkin, a studded leather belt and a broad leather band around his hat. "How do you know Jimmy?" "Oh, well, we Americans kinda stick together, you know. Gravitate, I think you call it. Like a herd of steers." "Yay," Jimmy said. "Marvin and I bumped into each other down near my hotel. He was kinda lost. But Texans easily get lost in such a cramped city. Not enough room to see anything." "You're darn right there. Can't tell a Manavong from a Norodom. They all look the same the way I look at it. And getting into one of those varmint-tuk-tuk contraptions is like shoehorning a bull into a whiskey glass." "What ya doing out here in Cambodia, Marvin?" I asked. "Well, I kinda figured some time ago that if I ever wanted to see the world, I'd better get off my darn ass soon before I get too old to get down the stairs and back. I think you've got a long way to go before that happens." That's what all the old-timers say, but not one of them don't regret seeing a little of what's out there when they're still young enough to enjoy it. "What line of business are you in?" I was warming to the fellow. He had an easy kind of charm, approachable and even trustworthy. "Oh, I do a bit of this, a bit of that. There ain't nothing I can't do if I set my mind to it. I like the way you pick up heavy objects. Any road. We have a lot of work on right now. Like to see if you could join us for a while. Until the COVID is over?" "Well, that's being mighty kindly of you. I was beginning to scratch my ass with idleness more than's natural lately. It's a nice country, but a fella can get to be darn lazy if he doesn't set his mind to something. Well, if you could help with the moving and the shifting, we'd pay you reasonably well. We aren't Goldman Sachs, but we'll keep you occupied for sure." "Jimmy." I could have kicked Marvin in the shins there and then when he turned up at that guest house. Turns out he has been shadowing me all along. Under orders, he says. It's policy to watch out for people in the mob, and they didn't totally believe anyone about anything. Marvin had to send in regular reports. But fuck Marvin, why do you have to cut in on the Mekong business? It ain't got nothing to do with the mob. Well, I don't rightly know if I give full credence to what you're saying there, Jimmy. Seems to me that little old funeral parlor has a lot to do with the mob if you consider that I've been doing a little bit of poking around in my free time. He put his hand in his jerkin pocket and dropped some grayish-white powder to the floor. Good quality concrete you seal those little columbarians with. Sets real hard, but you know if you get in there before it really hardens, it's darn easy to prise one open. And look what you find in those little silk baggies. He reached into another pocket and brought out a neat bundle stack of $100 bills. Nice loose change you stow away for old time's sake. Yes, well, what of it? I had to hide the loot somewhere, and naturally I didn't tell anyone about it. Don't you think the boys back home would be a little bit interested in where you hide their goddamn dough? They ought to have an inkling. So what are you saying? Are you gonna tell them? He thought long and deep before he replied. Hell no. I hate the Ginnies as much as you do, I reckon. I ain't no damn stoolie either. The way I figure it, we're kinda cut out to be partners. Natural as breathing. Partners? Come on, Jimmy. I know you got something cooking with this Fed chick. Why will you be going out with her so much? And don't tell me you don't know she's a Fed. That was it then. Marvin knew it all, or as much as most people like him needed to know before they shot you dead. Seems you're not all Stetson and snakeskin shoes after all, Marvin. You bet. So what do we do about that? You gonna turn me in? I don't really think that would be the best option, under the circumstances. I think I have to explain something. I'm not one of the Ginny yet. I'm just a show pony, a day trader up there for the ride and the steady bucks. I never wasted anyone, rightly speaking. They drew first and I fired back. That's how it was. The gun is just for show. Can you believe that? They don't care much back home how it went down, but I can tell you I never shot a man in cold blood. No women neither, but they're the worst varmints of all, I shit you not. So you're just a good guy trying to make a dishonest buck. Yay. How is it with you, partner? With me it's just that I got caught out by bad gambling and markers and I made a run for it and I ran into one of their bagmen. Sammy Pirandello. You know that useless bonehead? Can't say I do. But boneheads I know a lot. So they get me running a stash, the dough and powder and pills operation out here and it got to pretty crazy. They're a crazy bunch. And on the way out, the big guy has pancreatic cancer and can't take a shit without it hurting. He's 82 and thinks he's gonna live forever. He has no idea what he's doing except running scared from the feds and watching his back all the time. You don't say. I do say. And when they finally go down, all they got to trade really is names and a lot of people who got shot in mysterious circumstances. Most of the dough, the feds know about. They don't really care about the dough. They want asses behind bars and medals on their jackets. And I don't want to be one of the bargaining chips when the big man finally gets the big heat on him and is sent away to die in a puddle of his own urine in a federal penitentiary hospital. It's that bad, is it? It's fucking bad. You better believe it. So how can I help? First I'll explain how this cherry dame got involved with you and how much she's in on the deal. She's going all the way, Marvin. Me and her figure that we better head off into the blue yonder rather than hang around waiting for a miracle to happen. She's in love and I'm in love. That's all you can say about it. You sure? Feds are feds right down to their clean white cotton undies. I've known some. She's in deep with me and there's no way she can get out of it now. She's gone too far. She's painted a picture of me as some kind of sidebar on the whole scheme. I'm in the clear so far, but we have to decide how we gonna play the final round. Where's the money gonna go and who gets pinched? Marvin sucked on that for some time. Seems to me you don't have many options. Not real options anyway. The feds will want a large slice of the money and so will the men back home. But it's indictments the feds really want and it's money the Ginnies want. So you gotta find fall guys somewhere. The feds want the big man. That's easy. You must have a pile of evidence to give them by now. You tape your telephone? Always. Good. Well, that's him taken care of. He must have said a lot and given you instructions. It's enough to get him canned. They must have a whole lot more in their files, believe me. But that leaves the other end. Who's gonna be the fall guy for the wops? The one who stole their loot? Don't worry, Marvin, I got all that figured out. You remember those fuzzhead Caribbean assholes you frightened off? Cherry, she's actually called Giulia incidentally, got them deported, but I collected enough evidence to convince the wops that they stole a large part of the loot. Enough is left over to make us all well fixed for some time to come. How much are we talking about? Our share? 100 million, more or less. Phew. That's some payday. How if I take a cut of that? Say 9 or 10? Let's say 15 then. Just to be friendly. You're a man I like doing business with. Don't get too eager. There's a lot to do before we pull the final curtain on the deal. An awful lot. Giulia. Paulie Bonaventura was the name of the man they never mentioned, and it was clear why. He had a nasty habit of rubbing people out who got in his way. I was reading his latest Fed reports and they made rather pathetic reading now, and I wondered how he kept control of his organization. Bonaventura was released on questionable compassionate grounds from a 15-year sentence out at Federal Prison Cumberland. He woke every morning attached to an intravenous bag which overnight had given him half a pint of blood or a mixture of glucose and painkillers. His cancer was officially in remission, but getting there had been a struggle by all accounts. You could never tell with these guys, though, whether everything the doctors reported was ever really true. Dons like Bonaventura appeared in court in wheelchairs, apparently barely clinging to life, but when they got acquitted they almost danced down the courtroom steps. Bonaventura was an odd kind of individual in many ways. He had even been in the army, 3 tours of Vietnam, where he had even served with valor. He loved rubbing people out, and he had ample opportunity in the Mekong Delta at that time. He had seen a lot of Cambodia too, unofficially, because there was a lot of money to be made in the border whorehouses and liquor stores and drug dens. He had had a good war, and when he returned to the States no one knew where he had gotten all the money from to set up his own organization, a kind of sixth New York family, where he was careful never to step on anyone's toes and always paid a kickback to the commission. As for his turning to Cambodia, I suppose he had a kind of nostalgie taboo, as they call it in the criminology textbooks. Nostalgie taboo is a French phrase meaning nostalgia for the mud. It describes that well-known phenomenon in the criminal psyche to descend into the dirty old pathways of his career, his first thrills as it were in the filth of the underworld. The criminology profilers expected him to get back to his early times in Vietnam and Cambodia someday, and they were right. If you didn't understand that about Paulie, you couldn't explain why he sank money into casinos in Sihanoukville and Bangkok, why he had amphetamine drug mills running in the Cambodian hills, and why he had even bought through middlemen a quite legitimate brewery in Saigon. This was why he was hiding money in accounts all over Phnom Penh, where private banks could start up one minute and declare themselves insolvent the next. But he was pretty wise in his choice of banks and woe betide them if they didn't return his money with a lot of interest. He had a legion of the White Sox, as Jimmy called the local Chinese triads, at his beck and call, and I wondered when they would show up in Jimmy's office. Nearly everyone else did. No, they won't show up. You'll just get picked up in a car and bag placed over your head, and the short sharp pain in the back of your head will be all you will know about them, Jimmy said. They ain't the conversational type. They just move. The Chinese think the one who talks has no power. The real blow that came over the wire was that sad old but still apparently very much alive Paulie Bonaventura was coming to Cambodia. Listen to this for baloney. The baloney that must be true because you couldn't make it up. Seemed Paulie had seen a film in hospital about the Angkor Wat and how it was the oldest set of temples known to man. It had become a kind of lure for him. Get there and he would be able to take a piss without it hurting, or some such, he said. I couldn't believe it. Seems he had never made it out there when he was building up his store of money during the war. Now he was different. It was a kind of epiphany. Even hoodlums have them, I guess, even though the shock redemptions must be rare. You think he's really coming? I asked Jimmy, who was watching women's soccer on TV in my room and loving every minute of it. I haven't heard, but Paulie has a habit of just appearing. He's very hands-on. He's out of his mind to travel this far, but who knows, it might be legit. He might go to Angkor Wat and kiss the ground and beg the gods for their blessings and forgiveness. I don't know if they would be that generous, honey. No matter how many pagodas he promises to build. Pagodas? Buddhist atonement. For past sins. The more you build, the more sure you are you ain't gonna be a grasshopper or louse in the next life. You think he's turned Buddhist? Stranger things have happened. But as far as I know, Paulie Bonaventura is in one religion and one only, the Holy Church of Paulie Bonaventura. And he ain't giving up his pontiff's chair for nothing and nobody. Paulie Bonaventura boarded his United flight, first class of course, with a nurse and what passed for a wife these days, a brassy blonde hooker with big hair called Maureen. Maureen was a Fed informant, but Paulie had no inkling. They had put it to Maureen that she could already be in line for a 10-year rap for just associating with Paulie, which wasn't strictly true, but a lie doesn't hurt when you're trying to get your foot in the door, and a kick in the groin with informants. Added to that were some embarrassing findings in her family, such as her brother doing a stretch for Grand Theft Auto in New Jersey, and they didn't even add his drug possession to that, which by some twist of the pen could be turned into drug dealing, and see him doing real time. She was a pushover and actually liked the little phone she carried in her underwear, the one as long as your thumb and able to call the feds at any time if she could remember to charge it. Paulie, of course, was very nervous about cell phones and wouldn't have one within 20 feet of him. Paulie didn't know that there was not only an air marshal on board but a Fed watching him all the time over the free champagne. The Fed didn't take more than a sip as he was rookie, still adhering to regulations, and couldn't tolerate alcohol anyway, the canapes and the lobster tail starter. Paulie ate and drank merrily. It seems now he wasn't in the USA, so it seems he wasn't all that ill after all, but who knows? Maybe he had a death wish and wanted to make sure he died in Angkor Wat, the only bit of Cambodia the Americans didn't bomb. The nurse, middle-aged ball-breaker and actually looking like a nurse, didn't have much to do, our man reported, and spent the journey buying gadgets and scarves and jewelry from the in-flight shopping. Paulie must have given her a credit card. Jimmy. Paulie Bonaventura rolled into town and Marvin met him at the airport. I guess the deal was that he would pay me a surprise visit sometime, the way they do. You know, you turn on the light in your hotel room and there they are grinning at you, but I guess old Paulie was a bit too long in the tooth for those kind of tactics. Most likely he'd ask me round for a little talk, all general and nothing to worry about, but at the end he'd want say 20 million on his coffee table by sundown just to be assured that things were on the up and the Trinidadians weren't still stealing from him. But I was wrong. Turns out that Paulie had indeed come to Cambodia to relive old times and see Angkor Wat. Marvin reports that the first thing he wants to see are a few old houses along the riverfront where he used to hang out in the 1960s. Many of them were still standing. The old man even took a tuk-tuk with Marvin, his wife and nurse and another one behind. In those days, he said to Marvin, sipping a whiskey and water at a joint now called the Heart of Darkness, the girls were all over you, I mean all over you, 10 at a time, nice ones too, all screaming for $1 and pack of cigarettes. You could get a vial of pure heroin for $1, even less. And you sold it on for 10 to some other GI. They were all taking it. That and all the pills. I couldn't get hold of enough of them. I could make 1,000 a day easy just selling dope. The GIs had no choice but to get stoned out of their minds. Know what it was like? It was like the world was coming to an end at sunset and you'd better do whatever you wanted to do right now because there was no tomorrow. So when do you want to see Jimmy? Jimmy? Oh, there's no hurry. Tell you a secret, Marvin. I haven't got long for this earth. None of us old-timers have. I thought long and hard a while back about where and when I was really happy in my life. And this place took the top dog position. I was happy here. I want to be happy again. Money don't mean much at my age. I made a ton of it, and what does it amount to? Some young punk will probably drill me in the head someday so he can be number one in his own right. They nearly all get drilled, the big fish, if that is they can stay out of prison. But even prison don't scare me no more. It's peaceful, know what I mean, and generally speaking, you're safe. The ordinary food sucks and there ain't no women, but you know after a while you can make little arrangements of things. You can get anything inside if you have the connections. Get my drift? Sure do, boss. It's all a question of attitude. 200% right, Marvin. He pottered around the city just like that, like a man who had finally come home. Sweet, you might say, but you have to remember that Paulie Bonaventura had personally killed half a dozen guys. Low life sure, but people anyways, and had ordered any number of hits on other people. How Martin stayed clear of all that I don't know. Paulie had been a beast, and you better believe it. I was wondering if he had plans for me too maybe, but there were other things on my mind. It was getting time to roll down the curtain, as Giulia said, and there were very good reasons to do it pronto. The first was based on the news that came from Giulia. Through the agency she could place an information request to Interpol on the movements of just about anyone, not an arrest at the borders kind of request, that needed authorization from above. But in her ordinary investigations she had sort of carte blanche, another nice Reader's Digest expression I picked up recently, to monitor anyone's movements. So she decided to keep the Entwistles on her radar. And what happens? Turns out they had been sprung on appeal in Zurich. There are shyster lawyers even there who can talk the hind legs off anything and anybody, or maybe it was just the fact that the Swiss wanted rid of 4 dumb Brits. Jimmy, she said, they're heading your way again, and I'm pretty sure they were pissed. Giulia was doing her best to get them denied visas, but at the border crossings from say Thailand or even Vietnam a nice $100 bill could make anyone turn off their computer if they had one to check anything that is and not a pile of fading photocopied stop lists. Paulie wouldn't be in town forever and even he might not buy our story. Also, Giulia's boss was getting a bit hot around his starched collar about the lack of progress on the supposed money laundering. I, on the other hand, was losing count of how much money we'd stored and where all the money was. There was 200 million of it scattered all over town, and stashing and retrieving all of it was gonna take quite some time. If we were gonna move, now would be a very good time. What were we waiting for anyway? We had everyone we wanted in view. They wouldn't have to go looking for Paulie. He was already here. There wouldn't be any shootout in the Bronx and no legion of attorneys covering his ass. He'd be off on a plane and straight into federal custody. Marvin could take his cut and tender his adieus. We could eventually hand over 50 million to the feds and they'd be happy with that, besides the hoard Paulie would be giving them. Paulie would get 100, at least to look at, before the feds confiscated it. He'd have to be happy with that experience, and according to Marvin he didn't care all that much about money anyway. Marvin would get his 15. That left 35 million for us, plus the stash in the Zurich bank account, and with that Giulia and I could head for the hills. It's gotta start soon, Giulia. There's no point waiting. Have you managed to keep the Entwistles out of the picture? They look the kind of people who might get pretty nasty if they find out they have had one put over them. The best I can. But who knows? Look, here's the plan. We start collecting the lettuce now. Paulie's going to be in Angkor Wat a week, Marvin says. We have over 30 locations, niches mostly and many close to each other. Ought to be one night's work in about 5 main places. Easy enough to prise open the niches, take out the goods and seal them up again. You and I could do that. You can flash your Interpol G-Man, star sheriff's badges or just your weapon if we get any trouble anywhere. Maybe you can use those Love devices from the French NGO as lookouts. Then I've got to clear the old Buddhist cemetery for all the dope, but maybe I'll leave it for the feds to find, as a bonus. They love a large mound of powder and pills. Makes them look good on TV when they burn it all. And what do we do with the money once we have it? We place 100 million in 3 or 4 accounts the mob always uses here, according to Semi, and give the bank books to Polly. Or we could just hand it over as cash. I think it's a much better idea. We tell him the Trinidadians have the rest. Bonus in that is that when your boys arrest him, they have all the goods in the room in one way or another. Bank books or cash don't matter. I'm preparing the tapes of my little conversations with Polly now. The feds will have everything they need, but Polly will have had 100 million placed before him, so he won't suspect us. No chiseler double-crosser he's ever met ever hands over 100 million in cash or verifiable bank books. And the 50 million the feds get in addition to what they get from Polly directly, wouldn't that be a waste? Again, it's psychology. It looks better if there's more than what Polly has. It gives the feds an added kick. Just like with the pills and powder they're gonna find. It looks even more like a real bust rather than a setup. It never pays to be too tidy with the feds. I went round to see Mike, the dirty old man mechanic, and he stumbled towards us, sliding open the rusty grill of his slum apartment door as cheerfully as he could, which was never really cheerful, more wary. He looked even more 92 than 72 that day and had just returned from Bangkok, where he had seen a specialist for a condition he wouldn't reveal the details of, but because of his constant tremor I suspected was Parkinson's or some such. "Hi Mikey. What did the doc say? Aren't there any docs in Phnom Penh you can see?" "Not as good as the man in Bangkok. He's American. He said there's no change since the last examination 2 years ago." "Seems you shouldn't pay him then. I'm all in favor of no win, no fee for doctors. If they don't cure you or make it better, they shouldn't get paid. What do you think?" I could see that was a bit too much for him to understand. He was a guy with kind of limited understanding, but God, he was good with tools and an expert at fixing things. He was a real mechanic handyman, and we needed all his tools pretty soon. But I made a terrible blunder that day, when I look back and think about it. I was pretty disgusted by the guy in general, and I let something slip I shouldn't have let slip. It was an enormous blunder and nearly sank the whole operation. I said, "Well, Marky, with all the drinking, smoking and whoring you've done in your life, it's amazing you're still here at all." He didn't like that one bit, so I changed the subject. Big Mouth would rule what I said for sure. "We need a drill and portable electric apparatus to prise open some columbarian lids. Know what I mean?" "I do, but it's mighty challenging work. I have a hard drill, but I need to get a better battery to operate it unless you can plug me into the mains somewhere." Nothing doing there, I think. Columbarians don't have PowerPoints. "How many lids are we talking about?" "Well, we have quite a lot to do. We messed up big time. Turns out we gotta clear the columbariums of all the personal material we stored with the urns. There's been complaints about the decomposition or rats or something. Maybe they're just jealous or want a share of the pickings. I have no idea. But we gotta open the slots and take the bags of stuff out. Pronto." "You don't say. That's the way things are sometimes. Nothing you can do about it." "We're really grateful to you, Mike, and I want to give you a retainer right now. A good one. Here's 10,000. And I hand over an envelope, but he wasn't going to touch it. "Forget it. I wouldn't know how to spend that much anymore." Sounds like a good guy, a regular guy, right? But he wasn't. Maybe that was part of why he turned in the end. He didn't like to be in on any deal. I have no idea exactly why he turned, but he did. You can never know people really, especially old vets. They're all fucking crazy, they must be when you think about it, handling all that guilt. 5 nights running, Mike. I worked it out. We use 5 sites and 5 or 6 lids to be prized open each site. They're pretty close to each other. The rest I can do on my own. Giulia is handling security and paying off anyone who comes snooping. Might be more than a few hours work each time. You have the cement for fixing them back after? It's gotta look good. Masonry was never my strong point. I'm much better with glass, but I think it's an easy task putting a few stone lids on things. As long as they fit, and I think they do pretty tight. The local masons are fairly good as far as I can see. And that's how we got him to the columbaria, and it wasn't any trouble being there even in the daytime, because Giulia said that doing it at night was the most suspicious. Be obvious and be noticed is how you do anything like that, she said, hiding in plain sight if you like. It worked. The first night the haul was 30 million, the second 50, and so on. I was pretty methodical in how I stashed cash and bonds. Never too much cash or just bonds anyhow. And never over about 10 million each time. The one problem we had was on the third day when I got a call from Dusty and I couldn't go to the office. I said I had urgent business at the dentist, but the problem with that was that I had used the excuse too many times before and I had great teeth. The way it came to a head and we nearly got busted was just disgusting, but then Mike, as we know, is a very disgusting man. He's also a dry alcoholic and there's nothing very nice about the species. I'd really wound him up the last time I saw him by telling him straight, before he started prizing open the lids of the columbaria niches, that he'd spent all his life as a fucking degenerate GI. Me number one soldier wants sucky fucky $5. But now it was 20. That's inflation for you, and also how he was 72 but looked 92. I had his interest and faith for as long as I needed to secure all the dough, but as I say, dry alcoholics are unpredictable and very, very touchy. Robin Williams said the difference between a dry alcoholic and an active alcoholic was that the dry alcoholic was the same asshole, but he had fewer dents on his fenders. Alcoholics are never cured, just controlled. Anyway, the first thing we knew was that local police were knocking on the door of the Mekong rest home saying that reports had come in that 5 dead bodies, apparently frozen but quickly defrosting, had been found on the road at Sockcock Street No. 172 and that Mike was sitting on one of them cursing. He had had a rough morning. He used an internet service provider called Cellcard and I notched that they must be pretty bad because whenever I called him on WhatsApp or something, the phone would only start ringing his end after it rang 4 times at mine. Also, in his flat he couldn't get a clear cellular data connection to the internet either, whilst I with my Metphone connection had no trouble at all. Turns out that Mike had arranged to get a Wi-Fi router installed and 2 men had turned up because the thing wasn't working and Mike had been blasting someone from Cellcard on the phone all morning too. Finally he just blew up. He'd taken the 5 bodies we'd given him to store out of one of his old monster butcher industrial freezers he'd bought from a slaughterhouse or meatpacking plant and dragged the corpses down the alley from his apartment onto the main street outside. Suddenly everything made sense to him, although it made no sense to anyone else. He'd seen the light, sort of. Out with all the bullshit he was doing for anyone. They could have the bodies. He wasn't going to take it anymore. He's had enough of being criticized too. What right did I have to condemn him? Why would he feel guilty for just being the way he was? Was he kissing her, Nixon and the My Lai massacre all rolled into one? Was there any harm in paying girls to suck his wrinkled old gray-haired cock? There wasn't, and he wanted the world to know all that as well as many other things. The cops found him, prized him off the corpse he was sat on and got him upstairs to talk. He didn't say anything much. He handed over our business card to the cops and that's how they got to us. I was soon on the line to Giulia and she arrived looking paler than I'd ever seen her. You ever heard about grave robbers? I was saying to the local cop in his black uniform who actually looked quite intelligent and wanted to speak French, but I didn't know any. Seems this guy was following us about and snatching the bodies. I went on, half to the cop and half to Giulia. He's an old Vietnamese veteran. They're all pretty creepy, mad, loco, I said using the usual international gesture for insanity, tapping the side of my head and looking pretty screwy myself. That's right, officer, Giulia said as she flashed her badge and Fed ID card and tried to look as diplomatic as she could in the circumstances. They're our bodies, our property actually. The relatives will be very upset. I think we'd better not say anything to anybody about it. The officer, a lieutenant at least, was big and tubby and had a lot of shiny black hair. He'd seen a lot, I'm sure. Just then a Cambodian girl from liaison at the embassy turned up and she must have been a good friend of Giulia because she translated well enough to get the cop and his friends downstairs in their big white pickup truck and off our backs for a while at least. It was then that we heard a knock at the door and found ourselves looking at Dusty and two Trinidadians, one of whom I recognized immediately as Joseph. It seems they had been lurking outside for some time and were using Dusty as cover to enter the building. Dusty looked as pissed and as scared and as puzzled as he ever was, but I couldn't say anything except that I would explain it all later and just go along with what I say. I gave those instructions in a lot of rapid English and a lot of winks and twitches. Giulia. Getting to the Mekong rest home and finding Jimmy trying to explain the inexplicable was bad enough. Meeting the Trinidadians in person was just too much to take. It seems they had entered via Thailand as I feared they might, and they had clearly been off the pot for some time. They looked almost human and much more frightening than before. I came into Jimmy's office with so many things on my mind, it was impossible to know which thing to handle first. Then there was the fact that Dusty had never seen my official side, but I had to explain to the local policeman just who I was first. Dusty stood aghast, as they say in some books, and I liked the word. He was also speechless at first, then he asked, "What the fuck's going on here?" "Seems someone's been stealing our bodies," I said. "That crazy Mike guy. The vet. Maybe he needs the company. Wasn't it that Donald Nielsen who kept the corpses after he killed them? Maybe Mike used an imitator." My girl from the embassy was translating that for the benefit of the local cop who was going from astounded to just surprised slowly, so we were making progress in a way. The Trinidadians just looked on as if everyone had lost their mind. We probably had. Then Joseph spoke. "Oh yes, I heard of that man. It's a sort of voodoo. Maybe he learned it from the Viet Cong." I thought that was pretty helpful considering the local policeman felt outnumbered by all the foreigners present, especially the weird and fierce Trinidadians, and was backing down fast. At last he could stand it no longer and said, "Miss, I will leave this with you. I hope you can send me a full report. It doesn't seem to be a matter for us. An insane man cannot commit a crime. I hope you will see he gets treatment." "I promise that, officer." And he got up and left. The two Trinidadians took the remaining seats and lit up Marlboro lights at almost the same time. "Heavy stuff, man. What gives?" asked Joseph. "Yes, what gives?" said Dusty. All eyes were on Jimmy, and Jimmy was looking at me, then at the Trinidadians. Then I let him have it. I let them all have it. "The Entwistles are coming. They may be here already." "Who the Entwistles?" "Tough idiots, sorry to say, Joseph," said Jimmy. "But they have all the money right now. We gave it to them to place in accounts in Europe, but they haven't got round to it. They're British money launderers. Tough guys." "You don't say," said Joseph. "I do say, and you better not mess with them. The last guy who tried it was found hanging under Tower Bridge in London. You may have heard about it." "Straight up?" "Straight up, Joseph. You can check the rest home. We don't have a cent here. We gave it all to the Entwistles. There are 4 of them. A young lad, 2 middle-aged twin brothers and an old guy. Each of them has done time for what they call GBH, at least. GBH? What's that? Grievous bodily harm, I said. And that's what your little honky asses gonna get if you're messing with us. He was talking to me and to Jimmy. We're not messing with you, Jimmy said. No, we're not messing with you, said Dusty suddenly, like a guy in church who has found the right page of the hymn book and started singing. Maybe it was the fact that he was English and they had come to respect him as the owner of the business and his being an ex-soldier to boot and so possessing an aura of authority, but I could see the first glimmer of belief on Joseph's fuzzed purple-black face. He spoke. Well, you need a money launderer anyway? You can take the dough out of Cambodia easy and then you can take it out of Thailand easy too. You don't need to launder it. You just need to spend it. We can help you with that for sure. Joseph's friend issued a sharp cackle of agreement. We just thought it better if we used a gang of expendables. We don't want to get caught with mob money. Dusty was looking even more incredulous now, but he was keeping it down well. That's right, Dusty said. Every operation needs a patsy or two. The Trinidadians looked at each other, then Joseph spoke. Where we find these entwistles? And if you're telling us a story, you better get running now. We'll find you though and we'll skin you alive. Promise you on that. They're at the Hyatt. Where else would dumb hoodlums hang out? I said, you want their room numbers? Here's how they look. I took out the latest mugshots, courtesy of the Swiss place. Jimmy and Patsy both looked at me then with real alarm on their faces. But I wasn't bluffing. I knew where the entwistles were. Once you put out a search on people, the system finds them somehow. And how many entwistle thugs were there in the world? Thankfully, not many. The photos were real and very ugly. Jimmy. The way Marvin told it to me afterwards, it went like this. Paulie Bonaventura checked into the Grand Hotel in Siem Reap, which was far from grand in several ways. You soon found out that you had to ask at the front desk for the room to be done, and secondly you were never getting a good signal on the Wi-Fi. Whatever. Marvin kept his cool considering that he was going to do a runner with mob money and help to ensure that his boss, the boss of bosses in a way, if you discounted the 5 families, was going to end his life in prison. The way Marvin thought about was this. Paulie was not only an evil man, he wouldn't at all mind if he went away. He'd said so. At least he would have friends, company. What kind of friends would he have on the outside? Another dumb blonde wife, sons and daughters who were just draining him of money, and young punk mobsters dying to put an ice pick in his neck one night. Paulie went to the Dawn Angkor Wat gathering of course and the limousine brought him there at 5 in the morning where the guide was waiting and wouldn't shut up, Marvin said, until Paulie told him to do so. Paulie was really touched by the place though and bought a whole sack of souvenirs afterwards at the dumbest gift shop in Agra. Then the moment came and the dawn spread over the place. Paulie began to weep and for a moment Martin felt sorry for the guy until he remembered how evil he was really. But Marvin was most surprised when he finally spoke and said, Marvin, you know what those stones say to me? They say that I ought not to forget to keep going. These priests built something and so did I out of nothing. It weren't easy to make a new family in New York. One day they're going to recognize what I done and call it the 6th family official and ask me to join the commission. I know it. It's my life's work. Sure thing, boss, Marvin said, but he couldn't for the life of him have forecast what came next. So where's my dough, Marvin? Forget all the baloney. It's all about dollars. You know it and I know it. Have enough of them to pat around you and people think you're the Messiah. Yes, I can buy my way into the commission. I can give every last one of them 10 million apiece. Or more. I want in. I want respect. You get me? Sure I do, boss. It's natural. You want in. So get me all my dough. I'm going back to Phnom Penh tonight and I want to see you tonight. Where is it? Get on the phone to that runaway jerk Jimmy. I'm calling it all in. Marvin really did call me that night and he was shit scared, I could tell. The first and last time probably in his life he sounded just like an ordinary guy. He wants tonight, god damn it. He leaves here at 2 p.m. and he wants it at 8:10 at the latest after he checks into his hotel. How much have you got to show? Tell him I have a good part. 100 mil. All I can raise at short notice. The rest tomorrow. And none of that contains my share, right? Right. Don't worry. Just don't stick around long when you drop him off. Make a quick retreat. I'll have your money ready. In a case. Just get out of Phnom Penh and stay gone. I got it. So there I was in the office the next day after we had bid farewell to the local cops and gotten Mikey into a therapy of sorts because we took him into a clinic where he didn't mind going as he had done rehab before and he said if he didn't go he would start drinking again and that would be the end of everything. We would have to move fast. Giulia would have to arrange for a squad of local police to be on hand when Paul arrived to pick up his loot. I would have to make a quick retreat on some excuse just before they arrived. I would get to a hotel near the airport with my share and wait for Giulia a day or two perhaps, until she had gotten Paulie onto a plane back to the States accompanied by McGeorge. Wouldn't her boss just love to walk into FBI headquarters with Paulie and the money and some nice little taped conversations with some unknown person no one could locate but who she knew was me? Then they would discover the other $50 million in a suitcase deposited in Paulie's name in the hotel safe. It would all have run so smoothly if people weren't people, but unfortunately people are very much people, even or especially people who are also cruds and deadbeats and hoodlums and headbangers. Giulia. Here's how it went down at the Hyatt with the 5 Trinidadians hunting for the Entwistles. I should never have given them the Entwistles' room number, but in the end it didn't matter. People couldn't go higher than the ground floor without an electronic key, so they were about to ask for a room on the Entwistles' floor when, lo and behold, they spotted them coming out of one of the ground floor lifts. Seems that the youngest Entwistle thought it would be good idea to buy Mommy a present, so all 4 of them went down with him to the little shopping mall under the main building. Joseph whispered instructions to one of his men, told the others to wait, then followed the Entwistles alone downstairs. The young boy went past all the designer shops. No Louis Vuitton, Gucci or Burberry for Mommy this trip. He went to the tawdry souvenir shop cum convenience store which had somehow held its floor space against all the demands of management to build a Versus outlet in its place. He bought Mom something she would need always, a combined bottle opener and corkscrew in copper-colored metal with Phnom Penh and a little Cambodian flag embossed on it. Mom had recently taken to drinking Pinot Grigio out of bottles rather than boxes as they were so cheap now at Tesco and Asda. Yes. The little souvenir would get some use from Mom. He would think of him every time she reached for it. The other Entwistles bought only cigarettes, chewing gum and a girly magazine for them all I suppose. What was it? Something British called Rezzle. The Hyatt catered for all tastes. They made their way up a little staircase and moved towards the lift, all of them in that handicapped elephant style they had, slow and clumsy and heavy. Just as they got to the elevator, one of the Trinidadians produced a key card. As instructed by Joseph, he had just booked in, and called the other elevator from just 1 floor above, the restaurant floor. If they hurried, they would reach the Entwistles' floor just seconds after they arrived and got out. 5 Trinidadians in any standard lift is cramped, but they managed it. The lift opened just as the Entwistles were walking down the hall. Joseph watched as his men swung into action, their hands covered with knuckle dusters and, suddenly also, little koshes in their hands. Being proud tough guys, The Entwistles had to look smart and were all wearing jackets, so it was easy to hit them with kidney punches, then pull all their coats down over their arms so they couldn't use them. Then they were beaten again and pushed into the rooms the Entwistles had hired, a roomy twin deluxe executive suite with a panoramic view of the palace and complimentary fruit basket. On one of the double beds, the four Entwistles were coshed again before their hands were bound with duct tape and cable ties. "Who the fuck are you?" asked Rodney at last, spitting out a tooth through a foam of blood. "We is the Grim Reaper, man. We loves our work," said Joseph. "Now little English honkies, why don't you just show us where the money is before we really start in on you?" "Money? How much do you want?" It was Ronnie this time. "We only have bits of local currency and cards. A few $100 in the safe. Maybe. We is looking for a whole lot more than that. So why don't you tell us where it is, before we start taking you apart, bit by bit?" "Straight up, we don't have much here, but we could get hold of a few thousand at the ATM. Will that get you off our backs?" "ATM? I thought you money launderer liked to have at least a few million lying around, just for laughs. Just for fun. But we ain't laughing. Give us the money or tell us where it is." "Who told you we were laundering money? We do gambling, nightclubs, call girls and cigarettes. Not here but in Sunderland, Newcastle, Durham and Middlesbrough. Who told you we were laundering money? We don't need to. We make enough to get by. More than enough. Why be so stupid?" "So you don't know Jimmy and his little Julia and the Mekong rest home operation, I guess?" "Know them all too fucking well. We've come here because they've dropped us in it, and no mistake. We just got out of prison in Switzerland. We're looking for our uncle's money and they gypped us out of it. I want that Jimmy's guts for garters. I want him stone dead." Slowly, bit by bit, the Entwistles told them the story, and Yaspe could see that no one could think up such a tale to save their lives. It had be true as it was so unbelievable. And when he truly looked at the Entwistles and heard them speak, he knew full well that they couldn't be money launderers. They were sly and awake but fundamentally dim. All the money launderers he had known had computers galore. They looked nervy and geeky. They used nervous sweat and sported a shiny sophistication. They were as un-Entwistledy as you could imagine. Finally, Joseph spoke. "Looks like we've been had." Ronnie Entwistle agreed. Joseph went on. "But listen. We know there's money somewhere. You want it as much as we want it. How do we go about getting it?" The Entwistle smiled, all except the little one. He never liked people who hit him. He hated them. He wanted to kill them. Not once but many times over. "Jimmy." It nearly went perfect in the end. Martin phoned to say that Polly and he were on time and they would indeed be there at 8. Polly mainly wanted just to look at the loot, but he was wanting to take a little away with him too. He'd hired a Maybach because he was beginning to miss Fee and Big. They all do, all the wops, whatever their moments of regret, religious ecstasy or just being human. They ain't human, them lowlifes. They're pure scum, and you wouldn't appreciate that unless you'd been kicked in the face by these guys or their deputies. Then you might change your mind about not only the death penalty but hard labor, garroting and slow hanging. Liberals, give me a break. Julia got an alert on her work cell phone that something pretty horrendous had gone down at the Hyatt. They shared a feed of goings-on in Phnom Penh with the local police, and they were giving it special attention as it featured foreigners. Seems the little one of the Entwistles at the Hyatt had not taken kindly to being manhandled and had bloodied one of the Trinidadians pretty badly with a flick knife before he himself was beaten into submission. The whole thing had happened in the lobby, just as the whole gang of the Entwistles and Trinidadians were leaving to wreak havoc on me and Julia and anyone else they could find. Man, they were pissed. and they were coming round to see us pronto. Seems they didn't cancel each other out after all, said Giulia. Just what we needed. Two groups of morons after our blood. Dusty, who had said nothing for some time, said, "Where's the money actually?" "In the two big freezers on the roof. The new ones. I padlocked them." "That won't stop them. Better call them up. Tell them we want to talk." "Dusty, you're warming the cockles of my dear heart," said Jimmy. "Welcome to the business. Now where do you suggest we meet them? And how do we contact them?" "They left a number. When they were looking for Uncle Arthur. It must be in the files. Villains never change their numbers, if they have numbers at all." "Just a minute." He went to the large filing cabinet we used and drew out a slim folder. "Yay, here it is. A UK number. Bet they have it forwarded to their number here. Bet you anything." We yelled. There was dead air a moment, a few crackles, then a strange dial tone, then a more familiar one, the buzz of the slow shaky Cambodian telephone system. I spoke. "Mr. Entwistle. Jimmy here. Calm down, Mr. Entwistle. We can all come out of this ahead. I suggest we meet." And meet we did. Sort of. Dusty. I was in on it at the end. Not for money. No money was mentioned. I wasn't interested. But I didn't like Trinidadians leaning on me. I didn't like the Entwistles either. And I thought Jimmy was in a real jam, and mates are mates. Full stop. You can say what you like about me aiding a criminal, but I wasn't aiding anyone like that. I didn't know he'd committed any crime. So how can I be accused of something wrong? All me and my brief admitted to was that I thought Jimmy was being blackmailed or coerced or something similar because of something in his past, and I as a friend was trying to help him out. They couldn't lay a mitt on me. They had nothing. They were forced to let me go. But I did know there was an awful lot of money involved. I didn't know the exact figure. It could have been thousands instead of millions. It didn't matter. Once you start talking facts to coppers, you're done for. Facts are for them to discover and for you to shut up about. Remember that. Never talk to coppers, not even about the weather. Just have your brief with you and stay stum. The next thing I knew was that we were all in the work van, heading to a rundown Buddhist graveyard on the other side of town. They'd arranged to meet the Trinidadians and the Entwistles there and hand over the money. So they said. It was just after 6:30 and it was getting dark already. Giulia had done some phoning around and seemed quite pleased with herself. She also had a gun under her arm and another small one strapped around her left leg. Once we're at the graveyard, she looked more like a cop than an office girl. I'd underestimated her. "Insurance," she said. "I doubt if they have guns, but if they do, stay calm and let me handle it. Never met a hoodlum who really knew how to shoot. Doesn't mean they won't hit someone, but it probably won't be who they aimed at. So hard against cover, please. Like this." She threw herself a hard piece of masonry, a vintage grave that had lost the top part of its gold pagoda. "But don't stay there. No vertical at all if possible. You're a slim envelope-like thing hitting the floor. You have no profile. You don't have 3 dimensions. Just dive down and lie flat after you hit the ground. And stay flat." I was wondering what I was doing there at all. But in for a penny, in for a pound, whatever a pound is worth these days. Giulia. Never have I felt more in need of a bulletproof vest than that night in the cemetery. I remembered that if they rush you with a gun, you move in on them. If they have a knife, you run away. The gunman may hit you, but there are very few good knife throwers in the world. I already knew the smallest, youngest Entwistle had the knife, and probably some of the Trinidadians did too. One or more of them probably got a gun from somewhere, either smuggled over the border or bought locally. They wouldn't hesitate to use it. They were like fish in a barrel and they had nothing to lose. I had read somewhere that the West Indian hates prison more than just about anyone, barring perhaps the Native American or Australian Aborigine. Prison is like death to him. How would they get to the rendezvous and when? Jimmy had said 6 o'clock, but people were always late in Cambodia. Tuk-tuks got stuck in traffic easier than anything. Cars moved slowly too. They might be an hour late, but I didn't think so. They were all burning with rage. The Entwistles must know how much we had taken from them in Zurich. Added to that was the fact that they had been in prison. That's enough to rile anyone. Then they had been set upon, tied up and threatened by a lot of fuzzball Trinidadians. Personally speaking, I would be as mad as fuck. The Trinidadians had not only been bundled out of the country once, they had been lied to. They had been lied to by someone they trusted, Dusty. That hurt even more. I'll be the only one they see, okay? Jimmy said. The rest of you can stay out of sight. But I'd be grateful if you space yourselves out. Make some noise if need be. No way, I said. Look, I may as well tell you. You're not gonna like me for not consulting you, but what the hell? This is too dangerous for civilians. And you, my darling Jimmy, are essentially a civilian. So this is what is going to happen. Dusty, you hear me? I hear you. Jimmy, you on board with this? I have what they call tactical command in this operation. In other words, what I say goes. It's gonna be like this. Just down the road is a nice squad of Phnom Penh military police, the ones that guard the embassies. Complete with machine guns and tasers. On my command they're gonna arrest these motherfuckers, bounce them around a little, then accuse them of hoarding all the powder and pills stashed in this miserable graveyard. They're all going to be doing time unless they come up with some good explanations. I'd guess they'll be out of our hair at least 2 years before it comes to trial. Time enough for us to be well away from here. And what about you? Asked Dusty. Are you just gonna run away with Jimmy? No way. I gotta lay down depositions about everything before I put in my resignation. I gotta wait a year perhaps to make it look right. How about you, Dusty? They can't hang anything on you. I'll see to that. Are you just gonna keep doing Death Street? Who knows? It won't be the same without you two. Maybe I'll start dealing with live people. There have to be a lot of openings in that. Not so easy though, Jimmy said. Living people talk back. Just then 3 tuk-tuks hove into view down the street, full to the brim with evil black and white hoodlums. Here they come. Lambs to the slaughter, I said, but I wish I hadn't. We were cowering inside the entrance to the cemetery as I lifted my walkie-talkie to give the signal to the troops. But I couldn't get through. There was some asshole of a taxi driver somewhere giving what sounded like directions to another driver, as much as I could make out with my sketchy Khmer. I tried the adjacent frequencies with the keyword. It was palace, by the way, but all I got for my trouble in reply was static. Fuck. Lie low everyone and don't move. Jimmy. You gotta stall them. I'll keep trying the radio over here. If all fails I'll make a break for it and you better stick close. You too, Dusty. The troops are 2 streets away. I hope to God they weren't spotted. The Entwistles and the Trinidadians clambered out of the tuk-tuks, and Joseph it was who waved a 20 at the drivers and let them calculate who got what. They hadn't come all that far and 20 was more than enough. Do your stuff, Jimmy, I said and tried the radio again. Nothing. Jimmy. The Trinidadians and the Entwistles appeared at the entrance to the cemetery. In the fading light of day, they were silhouetted against the sky like a bad still from a spaghetti western. All that was missing were cigarillos, gun holsters and big hats. Welcome, fellas. Now before you get all heated and angry, just remember that we're all up against it. If I don't show the bosses real stacks of money, I get wasted. They mean business. Do have a heart before you start throwing punches. One of the Entwistle twins came forward and spoke. But that don't explain why you stole our money, Buster. It weren't no mafia money. It was pure Britannia. Ours. You do have a point there, but it seems to me that rightly speaking, the money in Zurich don't belong to anyone but the person who can put two and two together and figure out what the tattoos meant. You can call it right of possession. Or who saw and grabbed it first. Ask yourself, what would you have done in the circumstances? Wait until some hoodlums you didn't give a fuck about to turn up and take the opportunity of a lifetime from you? There was silence a moment. Then the eldest Entwistle spoke. There ain't no honor among thieves. They're all shitbags who'll do you as fast as look at you. But what about us, honky pasty white man? Said Joseph, lighting a Marlboro light and sucking on the smoke with great vehemence. Seems I remember you promised us a share, then fucked us. And don't tell me the cop pause just appears out of thin air. It was you, weren't it? You and that big-tit Yankee woman. And then your friend tell us some story about money launderers. Seems you fucked us a lot. And Trinidad don't like being fucked. But it don't amount to a hill of beans what happened up to now and how you got here. What's important is where you go from here. To the money or to a fight with me. You'll probably win the fight, but bang goes the money. Funny, white guy. It's not how we see it though. We think we can have your guts and the money. Why choose when you can have both? There was a swish and I saw the glint of steel. Then the younger Entwistle pulled his knife and I thought it really was the end. The police when they entered were a lot larger than we had imagined, and the riot shields took blows of knives and kashes easily. Nightsticks flew and tasers crackled. It was all over in a minute and the snap of handcuffs sealed it. Giulia pushed me to one side, past the villains and the police, and walked me out into the street. Good timing, I said. 10 seconds later and I would have been a rock-a-bob. Giulia. That left Paulie Bonaventura to deal with, and that ought to have been easy, but it wasn't. Marvin rang us to say that Paulie, wily old man that he was, had rounded up a little posse of White Sox triads from SYNOPSIS ahead of time as protection for the meet. I had no real idea how well Paulie and his sixth Mafia wannabe family were connected to the casinos and hotels and KTV whorehouses on the Cambodian coast, but we had heard rumors. Mostly the mob stayed away from Triad territory, but after Macau and Bangkok, SYNOPSIS was a booming little town for Chinese high rollers. The mob was nothing if not enterprising when it came to crime, and they could wash millions every day in hotels and casinos there, and no one would be any the wiser, least of all the IRS. Better have a backup, Paulie told Marvin. I don't walk in anywhere without a backup. Guys get bumped off easily if they're careless. Look at how some of the big dons lost their lives. Walking to their cars without covering their backs. Going to the same restaurant at the same time every week. Trusting a chick and going to her house. You get careless and you get wasted. And it's your relatives and buddies. What does it? Marvin met the backup in the lobby of the hotel and he was shocked by what he saw. A motley pack of 6 misshapen dwarves with perm-frizzled hair, toothpicks in mouth, Gucci suede snagged loafers on their feet, jade bangles on one wrist and a Rolex on the other. And White Sox, of course. Christ, Marvin thought, what a pantomime. You can hear the sound of a barrel being scraped somewhere. Dusty and I were in Jimmy's office when Jimmy got Marvin's call. He put it on speakerphone so we could listen along. Look nasty? I asked. The go-okays are always nasty in my experience. Chopper men, cudgel men, ice pick men. Varmints. I'll try to keep as many of them occupied downstairs whilst you talk with Paulie. Is it still the plan you mentioned? Can we get away in one piece? A midnight run. Almost. The minutes crawled past like a tortoise on a cold winter's day. Paulie would undoubtedly be armed with a gun somewhere about his person. In addition, his gang of triads were much more deadly than any gunman. But I was consoled by the fact that the Anchor SWAT team had experience dealing with the Chinese. They'd recently made a raid on an amphetamine factory upcountry and caught 10 of them. They also regularly crashed into gambling dens and mini-casinos all over the city. The big criminals in Cambodia were all Chinese and triads to a man, enjoying the advantage that no matter how evil they actually were, they would not be shipped off back to China to get an executioner's bullet in the back of the neck 10 minutes after the guilty verdict. Another minute, another dose of adrenaline. Women aren't supposed to sweat all that much, but we do. I'd never actually shot anyone, but in the circumstances I was quite prepared to give it a try. I wondered what it would feel like to know you'd sent a hollow-nose bullet into someone's midriff. Hollow-nose bullets are nasty. They can tear off an arm or leg. If I were a triad, I would sign up at a gun school. But perhaps their weapons were just as deadly. I only heard the spurs of Marvin's boots and no other tread as they came up the stairs. Paulie Bonaventura and the one triad he halfway trusted were noiseless. Paulie, out of years of practice watching his front as well as his back. The triad through long years brothel and casino creeping or paying silent visits to men who had missed their last payment and thought they could blow it on gambling and whores. Marvin came in first, as cool as he always was, whilst Paulie stood in the doorway, booted, suited, hatted too. He was much smaller and thinner than I'd imagined him to be, but like a lot of the WAP gangsters, he really did have the map of Sicily on his face, complete with 5 o'clock shadow. He looked beat though. It had been a long day and he was getting on in years. The WAPs age hard and long, but they age. "Come in, Mr. Bonaventura. Make yourself at home," Jimmy said, standing up behind his desk whilst Dusty brought a chair. "Who's this guy? And the Dane?" Paulie inquired rather testily, I thought. The WAPs never liked strangers, I knew. He went on. "And if you don't mind, I'd rather pass on making myself too much at home in a funeral parlor." Everyone laughed, or at least grimaced a little, even the triad, who was a bit taller and neater than the standard model. "This is my business associate Dusty Miller. And my secretary Miss Baines. Where he got that name from I don't know. Shouldn't they be home by now, resting in peace?" Paulie asked. "I like business to be confidential, even in a mortuary. Not everyone is a harmless stiff here. Yet." A snigger from the triad, who probably didn't get the joke but went by the slight menacing smile on Paulie's face. "Funny thing happened to me up at Angkor Wat. You enter and look down the walkway and see the 3 towers. They're on the Cambodian flag. Everyone knows the 3 towers. They've been there 800 years. But not everyone knows that there are 5 towers up there. The 3 you immediately see hide the other 2 if you look at the central temple straight on. But view it all from the side and you see that there are 5 towers, not 3. It's just like today. You tell me there's 100 million waiting for me. But I don't see it. Not only that, I'm pretty sure that there is more than 100 million behind the pile you want to show me. This Trinidad story is a load of baloney, ain't it?" Jimmy looked long and hard at Paulie. "It ain't. They're thieves. They took it. That's the God-honest truth." "Spare me the oaths, please. Heard that one a million times and it was always a lie. Next thing you'll be telling me you swear on your children's lives. Look, these fuzzheads from down Caribbean way don't have the balls or the ambition to steal from us and steal big. They're all too coked up and high on reefers to see the end of the week clearly. What would they do with 100 million? They'd be happy with a bale of grass and a case of pills." "Times have changed, Paulie. Honest they have." "There you go again, telling me how honest you are. A word of advice, young man. Tell me how crooked you are next time. Then I might believe you. What's your cut, Ben? I'm not interested, Polly. I don't want to go down with you all. The end is coming. They have surveillance and tracing you wouldn't believe. You can't take a dump without the feds knowing. I want out. We must be square now. I never owed anyone more than a few $100,000. You ought to know that it's never how much you owe us. It's the fact that you asked in the first place, and that you didn't pay up on time. That's a mortal sin where I come from. The whole operation we have going falls like a stack of cards if people run out on us. You're not out of anything, Buster. Ever. You just take your lucky stars you ain't in the river by now. It was just then that I began to hate Polly. I couldn't wait to climb the cuffs on him and see him wince. Look, said Jimmy, I'll go and get the $100 million and you can at least take that or leave it. I would take it myself. You can strip search me and hold me hostage for the remaining $100 million. I don't have it. Go with him, Marvin. If he makes a move, strangle the motherfucker. But do it slow. You stay with me, Chow Mine. And get your knife out. These fuckers give me the creeps. He looked at Dusty and me with disdain. Jimmy and Marvin got up and moved to the door. You and me gonna get acquainted, honey, Polly said, leering at me with his sad bloodshot miasmic eyes. I had to give Jimmy and Marvin time to get out of the building before I gave the signal with my little electronic trigger taped to my leg under my skirt. I decided to kill the silence. I only went to Angkor Wat once. On my bike. You get there and they stop you on the road at a little checkpoint and then they tell you have to get the ticket in Siem Reap, which is a 10-kilometer journey there and back. I go everywhere by bicycle. A policeman took me back to the ticket place on his motorbike, and I think charging $37 to see a pile of stones is a bit much, particularly when Cambodia didn't even know it was there until the European archaeologists told them it was. Wow, a broad with brains. That would make a change. Is that a compliment? I guess it is, honey. You're a cute doll and no mistake. I do my best. I smiled and blew him a kiss. Somehow I felt like I was licking a toad. Time moves slowly on a sting. It's like being in an accident. Polly said. What's holding the assholes up anyway? Can't be many places to stash money in this place. Seems to me the stiffs probably have priority. I smelt them the moment I came in. Tell you a secret. My uncle ran a morgue in Messina. Neat operation. They sent the bodies over from Palermo sometimes. All packed in ice. All full of holes half the time. Sometimes with their heads missing. Look at that, my uncle would say. That's what you get for crossing the operation. At last Marvin and Jimmy appeared carrying 2 big duffel bags each. They dropped them all on the table before Polly. Don't look like $100 million to me, he said. But half of it is in treasury bonds. It's 50. The rest is still upstairs. Shall we get it? I don't mind if you do. But hurry back. I'm going to open the bags one by one and I know you'd like to share the experience. They left. Polly made for one of the sacks, loosened the drawstring and put his hand in, drawing out a wad of bills and bonds. Looks legit. Kinda. I like the feel and the smell of money. Comforts an old bastard like me. Better than the touch of $1,000 whore. Know what I mean, sweetheart? He was looking at me. His tongue licked his lips a moment. I'd had enough Polly for one evening. I drew my revolver and pointed it at the gook. I pressed my little electronic trigger and the place suddenly became first a muffle riot downstairs, then a house of horrors with us upstairs, as Polly suddenly realized that it was worse than the hit, where you often had a chance of coming out unscathed. It was a raid and the clink of jail keys could be heard as clear as a bell in his mind. The subsiding mayhem downstairs was a sign that the squad of 20 of Cambodia's finest was making easy work of the triads. 5 of Cambodia's finest appeared in the doorway of the office, and Paulie gave me a look like a wounded seal, then like a bitter vengeful hawk. He spoke his mob farewell to the troops. They always have to say something nasty to stay in character. Clever bitches always get you in the end. Better have a dumb broad than a smart one. Congratulations, honey. Hope we don't meet some dark night. Never mind, Paulie, I said. We're used to threats in the service. Make a few more and you'll get another 10 years. If I disappear one day, you're suspect number 1. Better button your big slimy bazoo and think about doing a deal. The mafia's all washed up. Even the wannabe dons like your history. Before they even start. Be on the winning side the rest of your life. Not much left, all things considered. Snakes have venom they can spit across at you. The wops only have their spittle. He loosed it on me and I took it without wincing. It was pretty thin stuff really. Just like the blood in his veins, I should think. I wiped it on the back of his jacket as they led him to the door. You can do better than that, Paulie. Save it for the judges. And he was gone. Jimmy. With Paulie in the can and 100 million in their hands, the feds kinda stopped looking. They swallowed Giulia's surveillance reports. I was just a friend of the mob, in debt to them but not involved in all the malfeasance, and Giulia thought it would be a good idea to see what would happen if he kept me in view. Actually, it paid off, according to her, as they got wind of Sammy and all his operations that way, and when the money turned up on Jimmy's desk, no one gave a damn about it. Paulie was paying a courtesy call, or he was just greedy and wanted to remind Jimmy to pay up. Or he wanted to hide his money in the funeral parlor. No one really cared where the money had come from. The fact was that Paulie and the dough were in the same room at the same time. They not only had all the dough, they had all the tapes of Paulie conversing with some mysterious contact who could have been Sammy. They didn't care about that either. Sammy himself they never got a hold of. He shrank back into a hole somewhere and perhaps he was bumped off. No one knows. Of course, I always thought the feds might get wise and chase after us, but they never did for 2 years, so I thought we should make a move and get out and spend the Zurich money. How did we spend 2 years? And did they ever get wise? Just listen. All I can say is that the mob or the wannabe mob doesn't take anything at face value. If you rob any of them, you'd better see about rubbing them out before they get to you, or you pull off an even bigger scam on them. That's where Marvin came in handy. Marvin was still Mr. Clean in the eye of the mobsters. He'd never dropped them in anything, and when the feds got to him he knew nothing, said nothing and had nothing. Soon he was back in Florida and Jersey and Detroit and telling me what was going down. The real mob was pretty happy that the wannabe sixth family was out of their hair, and as far as they were concerned we were in the clear. But Paulie knew an awful lot of mobsters, and the word got round that Paulie's family had been shaved of a few $100 million and not all of it accounted for. Now that riles and intrigues all the mobsters, but not in an official kind of way, because not a dollar of it was legit mob money. What it does is to spawn a whole pile of fortune hunters. They would all come running for a bit of the action, a suitcase found on the train. Can't keep them away from it, because in the final analysis that's all the mobsters ever really want, a suitcase full of cash. It makes up in their minds for their lack of hair, the missing teeth, the single eyebrow, the fat paunch, the short legs, the murderous eyes, the whole fucking tastelessness and ugliness of them. The first rat who turned up we had word of from Marvin long before he hove into view. He was in the Sammy Pirandello mold, but even more so, slimmed down, or rather wizened down to the size of a skinny Bartley. You know, the guy you always find at the end of every bar you ever walk into. Not a muscle on him because he stopped taking protein years ago and replaced it with Kentucky whiskey or Johnny Walker. He was called Pete Falco, and he stank not only of the hooch but also of the cigarettes because he never really had one out of his mouth. He was 62 going on 80. How these guys keep going is a mystery to me. The few muscles they have ain't covered by anything we could call flab or flesh, so when I saw Falco, pardon me but that's how I got to call him, at the airport carrying his own luggage and looking dapper and wiry in his regulation silk suit, I thought we might be in for trouble. Keep your enemies close, they say, so I made the first approach. I said I was waiting for someone and the asshole hadn't shown, but I could see he wasn't buying any of it. His mean little head with those weasel features was already working overtime, and he puffed on his cigarette so much that the tendons stood up in his scrawny neck and the collar far too big for him, and the Italian silk tie matching the shiny suit, tortoiseshell green or gray or some such, and stinking of whores and nicotine and sweated out rye. Sitting with him on the taxi going into town was like being in a bad whorehouse. The driver made for the aircon straight away and wound down his window just to be sure of not catching more of Fucko's odors. "Nice of you to meet me," he said at last. "I heard you was coming. Seems I remember you from some card game or other. In Jersey. Thought I might show you around." He looked like a straight man you had just asked to suck your cock at that. I went on. "No one sent ya, I hope. This is strictly a private trip. We ain't always working. Especially me. I'm kinda retired. Not that they retire ya, but I think I paid my dues long ago." "Sure thing. We all want out. But they won't let ya. I'm out now. You ought to be too if you want to. Best of luck to you on that." He drew on the cigarette he was holding out of the window between drags, and it was burning so fast in the wind he had trouble getting a blast on it. Then he spoke. "Say, weren't you connected with that bust on old Paulie some time back?" "Not connected. I just happened to be around. He had it coming to him. Old man with too much money and not enough marbles. Greedy and careless. The feds scooped up a lot of dough that day." "They did for sure. But not all of it." "Well, talk is the Trinidadians or some British scumbags got away with the rest. Or the White Sox chinks. You know, the triads." "You don't say." "I do say. You wouldn't be out here fortune hunting, would ya? You'd be better off with a metal detector and a crystal ball. The money ain't here." We looked. "Nah, I'm just having a holiday. Not many places you can go these days without being pinched. I have a rap sheet as long as your arm. I hear the broads are really cooperative here." "If you have your billfold handy, yes." "That goes without saying. At my age you're lucky to get something even then." "Oh, they're very understanding about old men. Hardly anything else in the white-skinned line available to them in Phnom Penh." "You don't say. Sounds good. I might never go home." He chuckled, or maybe he was just breathing. With chain smokers it sounds much the same. Neither noise sounds exactly healthy. "The best place to stay is Street 172. It's kinda local and relaxed down there. Nice simple hotels won't shrink your wallet fast either. Nice restaurants and lots of people to talk to. Europeans, Americans. All sorts. You'll fit right in." And he did. He checked into the best Central Point hotel, which Dusty and I knew already like the back of our hands. He took to the place like a duck to water, and soon we spotted him with a bunch of the deadbeats, sipping beer and whiskey chasers in the darts and snooker bar close by. "I kinda like the place," he said. "Lots of guys my age, and they have stories to spin, I can tell yer. Some of them know where the loot is too. It's in a temple down the road. You know, the big shiny one. No wonder everything is gold down there. One day we're gonna organize a real search party. We got it all planned." Needless to say, he was dead meat once he was with the crowd in Death Street. He croaked around Christmas just after a nice whiskey session with the boys. We shipped him back, a sort of last courtesy to the mob. But it didn't stop there. There are more mobsters than you ever realized, like cockroaches under the sink. Just when you think you've done them all, another one pops up. The next one to turn up was a lot younger and a lot smarter. He was Electro Joe, so called because he was one of those gadget men. You know what I mean? Latest iPhone, solar-powered watch, he even had a walkie-talkie, a tiny one strapped to his belt. He needed a car as soon as he arrived, but he made do with a Royal Enfield motorcycle, expensive and a big engine which made a lot of noise. He soon ditched it for some Vietnamese thing, all electric with a spare battery he charged in his room at the Hyatt. I guessed he was a drug runner, doing well with a chain of drug mill doctors in the good old boy states like West Virginia, selling oxycodone to miners and dirt farmers and rust belters and anyone else he could find. He was pretty well fixed, but with guys like that, they always want more. He'd heard about the big bucks that had gone missing, and I figured he was smart enough not to keep close, as he would smell a rat and do something about it. He's one for you, Giulia. But if he touches you, he's a dead man. I looked at his photo. Quite a dude. But I'm not into dudes. Or fuckboys. I'm strictly gerontophile. I like fat old men. Who you're calling fat? Well, you do give that impression sometimes. Just vaguely. From certain angles. You're just seeing muscles, honey. Pared down to its lowest content of blubber. Of course, so much muscle bursts out occasionally. There ain't room for all of it in most clothes. Men. Women look in the mirror and think they look like shit. Men look at themselves and they see Tom Cruise, only slightly gone to seed. His stunt double at least. And that's before they start drinking. Which I seldom do. So you can rely on my objective opinion of my physique. Anyways, don't change the subject. You gotta keep an eye on this one. He's 50 and he's dangerous. You can probably bust him on any number of pretexts, but you would have trouble making anything stick. He's probably got 5 shyster lawyers on retainer. I like a challenge. Somehow I hate his kind. My dad was a crook, but all the cops liked him. He never sold dope in his life. Never took any either. And this oxycodone shit is really fucking people up. I like to send him away. For sure. Giulia. The modern mobster. What can I say? They're not like the old ones for sure. You knew where you were with the old guys, but the new ones are a new kettle of fish. Sharks are fish. Barracudas are fish, right? Well, this new generation are real sharks, the best ones that is, and they don't get caught. Whilst the old guys wouldn't go near a cellular phone and hardly ever spoke on one, these guys were all electronic, scramblers, satellite phones, infrared cam detectors, laptops, designer software, everything encrypted and in a knot. You couldn't quite nail them even with all the latest FBI hardware. They could see you coming miles away. They never had the stash, they never picked up any goods, they never had any bank account you knew about. All you could hope for was that one of their associates wasn't so careful and kept the phone numbers and account names and SIN cards somewhere we could find. In the drug business, the smart ones have to deal with dolts because ultimately anyone into drugs is a dolt and the supplier quickly becomes a user. I mean, with a pot of coke before them or a big bag of nice white pills, most of those guys will try some and get hooked and get fucked up before they know it. But Electro Joe was no user. He drank club soda, ate vegan, and I'm pretty sure he took it up the ass when no one was looking. No hookers called at the Hyatt for him, but I could see he was itching for one when I sat in the little cafe, playing the little lost tourist, toying with my eggs Benedict and looking impressed by the great figure of a man called Electro Joe, Giuseppe Manuel. Can you believe, and pure Sicilian stock down to the big eyebrows and permanent 5 o'clock shadow he kept at bay with Tom Ford's best creams and tinctures. A cool dude. A walking douchebag, but hey, we all have a job to do and I had to come on to him and pretend he was interesting. I'd pocketed the salt cellar on the table ahead of time and now played at searching the cafe for one, looking slightly myopic and vulnerable and sweet. He picked up on that straight away. He was a sucker for a damsel in distress, and when I walked to his table and asked for the salt, he smiled and handed it to me with that long stare the real douches have when they let you know that they're the cock of the walk, and no doubt about it. Actually, he wasn't too bad to look at. Lean, nicely coiffed, and with those designer stubble bits on his face. He'd also acquired blue eyes from somewhere, not Sicily for sure. They were cold, icy cold, and I felt I very well might have trouble with him. "Use mine," he said, holding the salt cellar up rather delicately, just like a gay flight attendant. In fact, was he or wasn't he a mattress muncher? Strange idea. A mobster in the closet. That would be something. "Thank you kindly, sir," I said. I didn't know exactly where I got the accent from, but it was trying to be southern and not quite getting there. He smiled back at me. We were on, as they say. The story I was going to unburden myself of didn't quite go with Eggs Benedict. What does a drug mule girl eat anyways? There was nothing in the FBI training handbook about it. I lifted the napkin to my face and did the best sobbing act one could. Now anyone in the profession knows that when people cry it affects their nose too, and that's a good way to distract from the fact that no tears are coming out of your eyes. I blew my nose with the required desperate sadness I thought necessary in the circumstances, and even uttered a gentle sigh. Joe was hooked. I'm sure he had been winked at by all manner of girls, but being sobbed at might be something new. It's less a honey trap and more a blubber trap, if you get my meaning. I left most of the food where it was, signed the bill, and made my way to the lobby, where I only had to sit 5 minutes before he sat down beside me, all concerned and heroic. "Why don't you tell me all about it?" He actually produced a business card. Now that was a new one too. "Mobsters with me, Ishi. Joseph Manuel, Vice President Pacific Trading," or some such. I pocketed it for closer bedtime reading. I told him all about it. How I had this package in my room given me by a man I had met and he wanted me to take it back to the States, and how I had thought it was unusually big and he had said it was some kind of special rice flour his mother liked for baking in her store in Minneapolis, but I saw it wasn't rice flour when I accidentally spilled some of it, and I knew that if I said anything I would be in big trouble because he was so nice and had loaned me $1,000 and he would meet me at the airport just before the plane left. I didn't blurt it all out like that though. All that came over a martini later before an early lunch of chicken Caesar salad with croutons on the side, which I ate with too much gusto because I was starving, seeing as I had left most of my breakfast on the plate. "Seems you really are in trouble," he said, wiping his mouth with a thick white napkin and leaving a few traces of his buffalo wings on it. "I am. He'll kill me if I don't turn up. He's nice but kinda hard underneath. Let me tell you something, you'd be a real fool to turn up with 3 kilos any kind of white powder at an airport. Listen, leave it all to me. I'll handle this guy. I've seen his sort before, believe me." "Are you sure? And what should I do with the powder?" "Tell him there's a problem with the wrapping and he'd better come check because it seems to be going bad inside. Mommy won't be pleased to get rotten rice flour, will she? Get him to turn up in the lobby. I'll handle him from there on." "Okay, I'll do my best. Thanks a lot. As long as he brings my passport." "Passport?" "Yes, he said he needed that to check me into the hotel. But he kept it." "They usually do. I'm sure he'll have it on him. He'll be worried. He'll probably want the package and then cut you free." What about the money? He won't want it back in exchange for the passport. He'll put it down expenses. Hope so. I spent some of it. How much? A few hundred. A girl got alive. It'll be okay. Even if he asks, which he won't, he wouldn't expect it all back. It's called investment shrinkage. It happens in business all the time. Be nice to him. He's a nice guy deep down. He even paid for my room in advance. And he never came on to me. Not at all. What was it that drew Electro Joe to such a PHONE and risky situation? I flatter myself that it was me, that I had a certain charm, a great acting ability. But you know what? Greed cuts across any amount of sophistication. The thought of 3 kilos of heroin up for grabs was too much for Electro Joe. We found out he already had a yacht down there in Florida and a beach condo. He had a share portfolio. Imagine that. The mob playing the stock market. He was a modern Ginny mobster for sure, but beneath it all he was still a street hoodlum yearning to be caught and put away. Yes, I said it. They all want to be caught because they can't take the tension of doing what they do. It's not guilt, it's just that their nerves wear out. They want rest, they want out, right at the back of their minds. They don't know it themselves even. So they screw up. Accidentally on purpose. And then they smile. The man acting out the role of drug lord hiring a stupid backpacker mule was going to be McGeorge himself. And man didn't he love it. But he wouldn't win an honorable mention in a student summer school video competition. He couldn't do CD and scumbag at all. People like McGeorge have a kind of Tanchino's short-sleeved shirt geekiness to them that makes them look out of place in anything else. He had bought or unearthed or borrowed an awful gaudy Hawaiian shirt and had it open to his hairy chest with a gold medallion glittering amongst the thatch. He stood there in the lobby rigid as a lacquer doll. He acted all shit scared when Joe talked to him right enough because he really was shit scared. Then he walked away pretty well, shaking and sweating nicely. But it was just nerves, not real acting. Then it was time for me to go upstairs with Joe and inspect the package, which was actually real stuff for the occasion. Perhaps Joey's gonna smell it or something. McGeorge got it out of his special safe, and man did we have to sign for it. McGeorge was thankfully okay with the idea of scaring off Joe and getting him out of the territory pronto. He knew as well as I did that getting him on anything substantial was going to be difficult, and McGeorge didn't like difficult. Scaring off Electro Joe was going to be another brownie point when he filed his report, another step towards that plum desk in Washington he so craved. The local cops were there in the bathroom when Joe arrived. They burst open the door and photographed him with the package in his hand, seated on my boutique bed cover. He didn't resist. He didn't call for a lawyer. We put it to him that we had the goods on him, but we weren't going to make anything out of it because we weren't interested in him. This time, technically, handling the stuff which wasn't his wasn't a crime in the circumstances, but a jury might think otherwise. Joe saw our viewpoint pretty well, and he was on the next plane out. Done and dusted, as Dusty says. Jimmy, you must be itching to know how it all panned out. Patience. There's still a lot to tell. If you skip to the end, you're gonna miss a whole pile of treats. There was, I think, we'd seen pretty much every type of oddball in the world when who comes into view but a Japanese broad with a treasure map and a metal detector and a dog trained to sniff out dollar bills buried 10 feet under. I shit you not. Story was that the reports of the Paulie Bonaventura trial had made it into the Asahi Shimbun newspaper, and the Japs were lapping it up. Paulie of course wouldn't go down quietly, and he dismissed his lawyers 6 times before he took the stand. No taking the fifth for Paulie. He was going to set a few things straight about the feds, for one thing. The money they had grabbed. What had happened to the rest? Well, that got everyone interested. Seemed to him that it was suspicious he was arrested in a funeral parlor of all places, and we all know that if you want to bury money, do it in a coffin. Seems he had been tipped off by someone that we were hiding the stuff in caskets sometimes. Well, that set it all off. They were almost singing and dancing about it in Japan, although it was quickly overtaken by another news cycle in America and Europe. In Japan, though, they made a comic book, manga they called it, with a title something like Coffin Treasure Hunt. And that's how the treasure legend arose, because the dipshit manga writer included one in his little comic book. He'd actually done his little nip homework too, showing all the main temple graveyards in the center of Phnom Penh and the outlying districts. Oh fuck, for crying out loud, what had we done to deserve it? Fortunately, the Japanese don't like Cambodia, and Cambodians certainly don't like people who had occupied them as brutally as the Japs. There weren't any busloads of Jap fortune hunters or even curious intrigued tourists turning up any time soon, but I'm sure we missed some of the former. You couldn't miss Miyuki Watanabe though. She strode into our office one morning complete with her little Shiba on a leash. She was quite a cutie actually, in between bowing and covering her mouth when she smiled. I could see she was well stacked and nicely shaped for a 5 foot or something, but not all that much. She could have been 40, she could have been 12. You never knew with these Oriental broads. Her dog was just like her, polite but you couldn't say friendly. It dribbled on the carpet because it could smell a Danish pastry on the desk. Miyuki wiped its lather and dropped the tissue neatly in the bin. She had the map with her, of course. It was a neat thing, crisp thick rolled up paper, or it could even have been parchment or vellum. Who knows? There's no stopping crazy when it starts. I wouldn't pay all that much attention to the map, Miss Watanabe, it's what we call BS. BS. Below standard, Dusty chimed in diplomatically, because he had taken a shine to Miyuki. He was almost licking his lips. Oh, thank you, she said and bowed again lightly, mostly with her neck, which was nice and cute like most things Japanese. He went on. You are a guest here. Please allow me to act as your guide a little. It would be an honor. Oh, thank you. You are so kind. And that's how it all started, the business with Dusty and Miyuki. I had no idea he could be so gentle, but you know, when a lady is involved, all kinds of transformations take place in a guy. The next few days, he was so spruced up and cologned and shaved that I volunteered to do most of the work in his place. His mind wasn't going to be on any funeral parlor job. When a man's courting heavy, you have to make allowances. Lend a hand. Fortunately, the stiffs had dwindled to an acceptable number as COVID dried up, and I wasn't all that pissed to do a little extra. How's it going with the Japanese? I asked a week later, opening the window despite the aircon to try and waft away some of the man perfume stink he had on him these days. What is it with some guys who think that they need to smell like a stuffy locker room to get a girl? It's going just fine, Dusty said, almost touched base, as you would call it. Japanese women are great. All no as they take off their panties. So did she? Not yet, but it's on the cards. Very much so. I'm the one who's holding back. She's as hot as mustard underneath it all. How did you get her to warm to you? It wasn't easy. But you know, these Japanese women just take harassment as normal male behavior. You have to be polite though. Dusty had taken her and her dog to many of the sites mentioned on the map, and they had walked around with her little portable metal detector and her dog sniffing. She had brought a trowel to disturb the ground and let the odors of whatever reached the dog's moist nostrils. Nothing doing. Dusty kept her away from the columbaria, and anyway they weren't marked on her treasure map. Upshot of it all was that they were in love, well, as much in love as any Japanese woman ever gets to be, because they're kind of loyal subjects of men really, not equals, and love needs a kind of equality, don't it? Otherwise it's just a variety of ownership. When they appeared together in the office one afternoon, I could tell that there was love in the air. Dusty looked like a Britisher coming in from a tiger hunt or some such, but a lot of people would say he was a cat licking the cream. When she was gone to powder her nose or something, I asked Dusty, "So you made it, you sly dog. Don't knock it. We're gonna get married. I'm off to Japan. This place stinks." You only realized it when someone turns up and you start showing them around. There's nothing to see. How are you going to live in Japan? Mighty prissy place, they say. She's loaded. Remember how Casio started? A guy selling a ring that could hold a cigarette so you didn't get your fingers all yellow. Well, her father bought shares in that. And she has them now. And a pile of apartment and office blocks bought with the dividends over the years. She can get me started in the funeral trade if I want. There's no outfit there dealing in foreigners. Why not? Wow. Dusty did Death Street and cleaned up after all. Looks that way. And it did. Dusty left and signed everything over to me. So far, he has 2 kids, adopted, a house in the mountains and a penthouse in Shibuya. Giulia. Polly went away for life plus 99 years, which is a sort of badge of honor in the mob world. The real mobsters were delighted at the news, of course, and Polly himself wasn't all that pissed, as there were many comforts for a man in his position inside a federal penitentiary. You were secure for one thing, relatively speaking. You had lots of commissary coming your way because you could afford everything, and as a lifer you got all kinds of privileges thrown in. He even had a little cat, a waif he had found wandering the cells, and he would sit in his cell, actually a suite in the medical unit with a jacuzzi disguised as a thermal bath for arthritis sufferers. He would sit there stroking the little thing like some stand-in Goldfinger, which he was in a certain way of looking at things. But even in luxury and still pulling the strings outside and with a steak dinner every night if he wanted it, Paulie got to thinking, and he just couldn't let go of the idea that Jimmy was in on it all along. The feds had tried to whitewash him, but it just didn't make any sense. Jimmy was as free as a bird, and he wasn't. And where did all the loot actually go? After the feds released him, Paulie's guys caught up with Joseph before they sliced him in 2 in a Jamaica slum. Joseph was some hard nut to crack, but when they have your nuts in a vice and hoodlums look like they're going to slice them off any minute, men begin to talk, and what Joseph had to tell was that he had been set up by Jimmy, and that Jimmy was a cool calculating rattlesnake, and if Joseph had the money, you could search him and look around the filthy apartment, and if there was any money, he could pay his back rent with it. They believed his story and topped him. Paulie also noticed that Marvin was still in circulation and wasn't taking any new assignments. He had kind of retired and was doing pretty well for himself on a condo in Palm Beach, keeping his boots on even in the heat and putting them up high on the bar tables to take the weight off, but no one minded because he always tipped well and paid his bills and was easygoing. All the Texans are that way. Let him be, the bar owners would say, and Marvin tipped his hat at them and ordered another bottle. But Marvin got serious word that there were contracts put out on him and Jimmy, and he made his way post-haste, as they say, to Phnom Penh to discuss matters. He spoke a lot that day, the most words I've ever heard him utter in one sitting. They're gonna send the best they have. If I know the one they have in mind, we're in for a hard time, because he may already be here and we don't know it. He's a will-o'-the-wisp, a specter. No one even really knows his name. All except me. He's John Olbottom III, and he has a sense of humor at least. I met him once. On board Paulie's yacht. He looked like an odd kind of person to have hanging around, clean, tall, and definitely not a wop. He spoke pure Bostonese. Whilst he was swimming, I took a peek inside his billfold. It was lying under his Glock automatic. He had 5 or 6 visiting cards with different identities in the cities I usually found assignments. New York, Denver, Seattle, Houston. That set me thinking. Then he had ID cards and driver's licenses from all over too. A man who traveled. A man with different identities, with a Glock that had a thread where a silencer could be fitted. He was a hitman just like me. Maybe even better. He probably actually wiped out people. I don't as a rule, unless they shoot at me first. We were sitting around tearing into the lobsters and crabs and steaks Polly loved, and there were bottles of crystal going round like it was Christmas, but Rowbottom wasn't having none of it. If you're John Rowbottom III, WH were the first to like? I said. He liked it. That's a good one. Haven't heard it for over a year. Had to plug the guy who said it the last time. He came at me just as we were having a quiet discussion. People are so unreasonable. I know what you mean. Me and Rowbottom, we kind of hit it off there and then. He had easy slow movements and delicate hands. No ruffian. A smooth dangerous critter, always looking but never seeming to look, and a cold in his eye I hardly ever saw before. We better be careful. Very careful. Where do you think a cool dude like that would choose to hang out on a job in a place like Phnom Penh? Well, he'd like to keep his targets close. He'd study them for a week, just like I do, and then he'd decide when to hit. A dark corner somewhere, away from cameras, a certain hour of nighttime, never daytime if he could help it, and a sure escape plan. Do you remember if he used any other name on his cards or IDs apart from Rowbottom? Yay, come to think of it, there was one driver's license which stood out from the rest. It was an Irish name, something. Yes, definitely something. It's okay, I said. I'll have it run through the system right now. See if he used that on a passport entering the country. It would make sense. He doesn't seem the sort of guy to complicate matters. Then we'd see where he's staying. It might be that simple. Who knows? Why should he suspect that you know anything about him except his real name, if it is indeed real, which I doubt. He's a kind of poser, I think. Just a hunch. I ran his name through the airport arrivals, and yes, there were 6 somethings arriving the last week. You think the contract is that fresh, Marvin? I was told that Paulie gave the instructions the last visit with his lawyer last Thursday. Well, they photograph people now to go with the check at the airport, and they're sending me the mugshots. Wait. Here they are now. Take a look. Marvin flashed the 4th picture on my screen, and there looking at us with his fish eyes was John Rowbottom, alias Michael Seamus O'Leary. I wondered if he was speaking with a Dublin drawl now too. Possibly. Where's he staying? Jimmy asked. Let's hope it isn't our hotel. I don't think he'd like to be that close. Too many eyes and too many cameras our place. Hope you're right. Stop hoping. Only losers hope. I was right about Rowbottom. He was a poser, and he wouldn't be staying close. He was up there at the Raffles Hotel Le Royal and probably outside in a car watching us right there and then. I had a squad of local plainclothes scour the neighborhood whilst we were there, but they turned up nothing. Then I sent them to search around our hotel, but they couldn't find any suspicious tuk-tuks with white strangers lurking inside. At the Raffles, they did indeed spot him though. He was down at the swimming pool with his iPad, not doing anything in particular. Endless fresh coconuts to drink. No booze ever. Man, he's smooth. He hasn't even started. 2 days he's been here. Hasn't moved much from the hotel, the staff say. I've put a local man in the room next to his communicating door and a keyhole cam. We got him. That's what we thought, but Marvin's characterization of the guy came true. He simply disappeared. He went out, shook his tail, one of the best of the local squad, a squad that had busted numerous people smuggling and crystal meth operations in Phnom Penh and Sihanoukville. He's gone, I said. They lost him. He must have smelled something. Not necessarily, Marvin said. He's just slippery. It's part of the routine. You check the room and you'll see he left all his stuff, but nothing of value, nothing to give you any clues about him in general or his future plans. He just upped and left. Instantly. At some point you assume you've been made, even if there's no evidence you have been. You act always as if you've been watched since you arrived, that someone's tipped your target off, which often happens in fact, and at a certain time you just drop everything and assume a different identity. That's how he's lived so long. You feds have nothing on him. He's a clean skin. Problem for us is that he would probably disappear all of a sudden like that just when he's about to strike. We better stay here and not move. He's gonna show himself. And soon. I got onto the local squad, who were a mite embarrassed at losing their suspect. Captain Kosai was determined to make good, so promised around-the-clock surveillance of our street and the adjoining temple and all roads leading our way. Problem was that our road, Russian Federation Boulevard, was the main highway to the airport and there would be a lot of foreigners taking it. Not many tuk-tuks and taxis would be stopping on the way though. We hoped. I said. We'd better send out an order for food and drinks, and see about bedding down the best we can. This is going to be a siege. Maybe McGeorge can help us out. On the other hand, better not. He's bound to ask a lot of questions and gummed up the works. Jimmy had an idea. I could always call up Peter. He's not far from here. Probably skulking down in Death Street. He took over Mike's place when he had his fit and got sent to the clinic. They couldn't find anyone else to give the apartment to. You could send word there. Yeah, I'll send one of Kosai's men. Peter appeared an hour later, more ghoulish than ever, with his girl in tow. She was looking more worn than the last time I saw her. Much more. The blankets and roll-up mattresses are downstairs. Too much for me to haul up personally. The walk upstairs had puffed him out, so he took a chair and slumped his emaciated frame in it. God, he was a mess. 65 going on 85. Huge bulging eyes, a bald pate, matchstick arms and legs. What gives anyway? You lot forming a hippie commune? It's been done. He went back to Mike's place. He was trying to sell it for him, but no one wanted to buy. Jimmy. I've never been in a siege. Most sieges I reckon have the advantage that the people inside know roughly where the people outside are located, and often they can open the door or peer over the ramparts and see them if they have a mind to. We were under siege and we couldn't see who wanted us dead. There was a little ring of policemen and cars watching the area for odd occurrences, but I knew someone like Mr. Rowbottom would probably bide his time and wait for us to get tired of being holed up. On the other hand, he might just lose it and decide to go in. What would you do in this situation, Marvin? Marvin didn't like being cooped up. He didn't like being a target. It had never really happened to him. I'd pick them off one by one. The policemen, I mean. Or I'd see who was coming and going in which car. I'd immobilize one of the men and drive up nicely under the cover of darkness, maybe borrowing a policeman's clothes, if they fit, and walk right in here and blast us all to hell. You don't think he'll just wait? He's done enough waiting. And he's as sore as hell that his cover's been blown. He must have spotted some of the police by now. They ain't that invisible. He's down to his escape plan now, which is probably a motorbike over the border to Thailand. When he's done the job, he'd cross somewhere safe he's checked out already, where the border is easy to get through, way off the highway. It's easy to do. I've tried it myself. And when you're down to your escape plan, you just want out. And fast. I don't think he's ever been blown like this before. He'll be hopping mad. His pride's kind of hurt, you see. Every hitman is a sort of prima donna deep down. All ego. Not me, of course. We went up to the roof to reconnoiter and think things out. The roof had an attractive little view of the temple and the school and some neat gardens around cute little houses, all set way off the noisy highway. Giulia brought up some beers. "Courtesy of the FBI," she said. "No snacks. Budget cuts, I'm afraid." "What's to stop this guy trying what you described during the daytime, Marvin?" I said. "He's too tall and the only way he could get away with it is when the cops are falling asleep and can't see anything much. Believe me, he'd like to. He hates bad jobs like this one." We sat at a little table on plastic chairs that had been up there for years. The previous owner had even installed a little grill affair, and the ashes from his last barbecue, years ago, had not been cleared away. All in all, with the beer and the quiet and the company, it was a nice little rooftop scene, and I was beginning to feel rather mellow in the sun. Suddenly an odd little thud hit the wall behind us and the plaster shattered. "What the hell?" said Marvin. "He's firing at us." We ran like hell to the staircase as a rain of bullets fell behind us. Marvin looked up at a building 100 yards away and saw the telltale glints of metal and glass. "He's got a scope on his rifle. Fuck. We were nearly done for." Giulia was on her phone in an instant and the building in question was surrounded and stormed. "They're gonna get him. They're hard men now, these Khmer cops. They've taken down some really bad Chinese desperados recently. He's toast in my opinion." "I hope you're right, darling," I said. "He's obviously a real mean bastard. He'll have to be snuffed out." And he was. We got word 10 minutes later. Rowbottom III had actually jumped from the roof, aiming for the back of his pickup truck, which he had padded with a mattress beforehand. But he had missed. Badly. The sides of his truck had virtually cut him in two. The cops left him there, die, and made no effort to resuscitate him. He was probably dead instantly anyway, they figured. They didn't care. The problem was the body. But then it was suddenly no problem at all. We took it in a Khmer body bag and we put it into the incinerator. It was the last body we actually burned before we closed up the business. Giulia. Sitting in the house in Zulikon looking over the lake at Kilkborg where they make all that Lindt chocolate. Turning on the radio and hearing that strange singing Swiss German which I am learning gradually when I have a moment. Then the coffee and the croissants which they call Gipfeli here and which Jimmy likes. Somehow he's slotted in here just right. He's rather short and stout just like the local men, but I'm having trouble as the local women seem to be spitting and glaring at me all the time with their fat asses and short legs. Never mind. In another year or two we will be getting the passport. Officially speaking we're foreigners until then, but Jimmy has it all worked out. He's married this woman in Haarlemmerburg down the road who rather likes the idea of being a part-time wife. She's loaded and doesn't mind at all if he disappears to his office, which is what we call the house, but to be honest it's a bit of a creepy place, all old furniture built to survive an atomic catastrophe and lugubrious curtains and carpets all at least 100 years old. Officially speaking I'm his secretary and Verena, his wife, drops in every now and then because all eyes are on you if you're in Switzerland and we don't want Jimmy to be accused of marrying for a passport when the time comes for the Einbürgerung, as they call it. Paulie died in his prison hospital bed halfway through a New York cut done extra rare. His sons are so squeaky clean that they wouldn't even consider touching a cent of his money. They're both lawyers and religious to boot. I don't think they'll be showing up doing any kind of vendetta. The moment they leave the US, they'll have a posse of the feds on their tail for sure. So you might say we have it made. The funds in the bank here are doing nicely, and what do you know? Jimmy had a brainwave and opened a business here. Cryonics, would you believe? In this case it's not about freezing the whole body or a head like they do in the places with no imagination such as California and Arizona. That's real creepy in my opinion. Heads and bodies in the deep freeze forever. Yuck. No, You just preserve some of your DNA in whatever form you choose. It's frozen and cataloged and preserved in a cave just off the Gotthard. Forever. The Swiss were a bit reluctant at first, but then their police checked it out and started salivating. They saw our operation was a goldmine of a database, with all kinds of people on call there for murder investigations, fraud investigations, claims to property, or just anything else you might be curious about. Seems you don't need an exact match of DNA these days. They can trace you even if you're not on a database through cross-referencing and elimination and family profiling. We have thousands of people's DNA on file already. We advertise in the best magazines and our PR guys appear on the best talk shows. The customers pay $300 up front and they get a little card on their birthday telling them that they're now, forever, that's the name of the company, and one day they will be reborn. They have to send in photos and memoirs and their life story so the renovated and lovingly restored themselves will know where they came from. It's a funny way to get immortality, and it will probably never work, but who knows? People like it, the tills are ringing and everyone's happy. I even get a USA federal pension. The Bureau did me proud and gave a nice reference and a plaque and everything. They never got wise and they never really wanted to. If they had to admit that Paulie was set up and entrapped, they would have to undo his conviction and admit that they're nasty little shyesters, and they never want to do that. Who does? Jimmy. Verena is a real nice woman. She leaves me alone. When I was married in America, I used to joke about the marital state quite a lot. If I heard of a couple who had been together 20, 30 or even 50 years, I would say, right to their faces, even Charles Manson was eligible for parole. Marriage should be fixed term only. You know, you give them say 3 years to start, a sort of probation, and if they don't act like real bitches and spend all your money and don't turn into a fat couch potato, then they get another 3 years. Maybe 5 in exceptional cases. And so on. Verena keeps herself trim, but she's no match for Giulia, and she's happy to have me come and go. She takes me to meet her friends and her parents sometimes, and I'm okay with that. Look, who doesn't want to play the toy boy? The Swiss are a strange bunch though. If you can spot one. The people you notice in Zurich aren't the Swiss. The Swiss kind of blend into the background. They've got eyes which are always looking, retro-focused kind of. They always seem to be looking more at themselves than anything outside. They've also built a great country around their hotels, as someone said. But it's not only hotels in Zurich, it's a lot of buildings which have been here for centuries. Call me rude if you like, but somehow I think that if nothing in a place changes except that the people get older, that's a kind of tyranny. Some of the buildings ought to go every 50 years or so. Sure, you can hang on to some of them, but hell, styles and people's wants change. Who likes to live in a museum? I guess it's alright if the town is Florence or Rome or Venice, but God, who wants Zurich with that huge clock staring down at you at all hours and reminding you that time is your problem but not the city's problem? Picturesque, pretty? I don't think so, it's just old. Then there are the foreigners, all happy to be here because they've made it to the country everyone wants to be in, all except anyone who's been here more than a year. The expats are despised by the Swiss really, but the country knows that they need hard-working, intelligent people because, let's face it, these Swiss are inbred to the point of idiocy and deformity. It starts with the eyes and the small height. Then it gets worse until they're just idiots. I read somewhere that the Swiss are actually dying out, genetically speaking. The Swiss who marry foreigners have all the children. The Swiss who marry Swiss have hardly any. In the schools they have had to arrange for English-speaking streams because who in the hell wants to learn German and the Swiss yokel version of it? Give me a break. Every few weeks Giulia and me goes to the bank to check on our fortune. They know us there now. We haven't withdrawn all that much because the business of cryogenic DNA freezing is taking off in a big way. The warehouse in Kreis 5 is full of packages and the office is full of checks and money transfers on our screens. It's a lot more comfortable to do than hauling and burning bodies. Every now and then the police turn up because they want to trawl though the DNA profiles looking for someone, and they often make a hit. We don't mind. It's part of the deal. Officially speaking, we don't have a DNA database, but what's the difference between a database and a list of customers? Naturally, we could have left all the samples to molder away, but that ain't professional, is it? A lot of vials of blood and bits of skin rotting away gently in a cave. We do an electronic profile of everyone for the simple reason that if you have the Dracula Frankenstein belief that you can make a body and a brain out of a bit of blood or skin, you have to believe that you can do that electrically somehow in the wonderful future. Don't knock it. Would you believe in an MP3 player if you hadn't used it? Or in heart transplants? Or in the internet? Who knows what the future holds? I thought of inviting Dusty to join the business, but he has something just as good cooking in Japan. The Japanese are quite keen to get foreign dead bodies out of the country as soon as possible, just like they are quite keen to eject the live ones as soon as they can too. You can always judge the racism of a country by how difficult it is to get one of their passports. Some Japanese have lived in Japan all their lives and can't get one. Anyway, his business is booming as he presents the Japanese authorities with everything they love in Japan. Lots of forms, triple wrapping and speedy service. He has the stiff hygienically trussed and hermetically boxed before you can say sayonara. He has white-gloved staff to push the trolleys into the cargo hold, and the government coughs up most of the cash in most cases in advance of anything the relatives abroad might pay, and they're happy to forget about whether they get reimbursed. Dusty is very okay with that and has even begun to learn Japanese. His wife eventually produced a son and heir too to add to the adopted kids. It might be the beginning of a dynasty. Giulia. We eventually found a place in the Toscana where lots of the Germans and other rich awful people go, but what the hell, it's nice over here and we both have Italian names now. Our Italian was zilch at the start, but is getting better. I'm not going to tell anyone where we're living because our life might get spoiled in some way. When Jimmy gets his Swiss passport, we were thinking of moving down here permanent. We would have children, ride our bicycles and try and fit in as best we can this time. He's taken to opera of all things and is up there in Milan a lot of the time. I go with him, but honestly, it's not my scene except for the glitzy splendor of it all and the atmosphere of romance and all those lovely clothes people wear. Okay, I'm a Philistine. So what? But you know what? Life is getting awful boring. I might just join up again and try to do something different at the feds. I would be pretty good at cleaning up this sinkhole Italy, for one thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the country. It's my own country really after all. But God, you can smell the crime just like you can smell the macho men and their cologne and coffee breath and the exhaust of their excuse for small penis cars. Okay, I said it. Jimmy misses the Chancer life in Phnom Penh too. Maybe he has nostalgia for the embalming fluid. We've both decided that the life of early retirees isn't for us. So watch out. I may be down your way sometime. No need to worry if you are legit and honest. But God, I love to put handcuffs on crooks and look at their faces as they're taken away. Ciao.